You are empty, not in a way that makes sense, not after a big loss, not after a clear disappointment, not after any specific event you could point to and say this is where it started. Simply empty, as if something left without warning and left behind a space you don't know how to fill and don't even really know what it was before it went away. And the strangest thing is that your life on the outside is reasonable, maybe even good. You have what you have, you're doing what you're doing, things objectively aren't that bad, but on the inside, there's a silence that isn't peace, a neutrality that isn't balance, an absence of meaning that shows up in the most random moments and won't go away no matter how hard you try to fix it. You've tried to distract yourself, tried to stay busy, tried talking to someone, tried changing your routine, tried doing things that used to bring you pleasure and that now pass through you without leaving much trace. And the emptiness remains, quiet, persistent, without explanation. The easiest conclusion is that something is wrong with you. But what if it wasn't? What if this emptiness wasn't a sign that something broke, but the sign that something is about to change? What if the absence you're feeling right now isn't loss, but space being opened? Space for a reality that hasn't arrived yet, but that is already being built from the inside while you try to understand what's happening to you. Stay until the end, because what you're about to understand here can completely change the relationship you have with what you're feeling right now. Mobadar, there's a very important difference between the emptiness this video is describing and other kinds of emptiness you may have felt before. It's not sadness. Sadness has weight, has texture, has a direction. It points toward something, toward a loss, toward a longing, toward something you wanted and didn't get or had and lost. Sadness has content. This emptiness doesn't. It's precisely the absence of content that makes it so hard to deal with. It's not depression in the clinical sense, the kind that has an identifiable cause, that responds to treatment, that has a specific pattern of thinking associated with it. This emptiness is more neutral than depression, less dramatic, less loaded with negative thoughts about yourself or about the future. It's almost a suspension, as if the emotional volume was turned down without anyone touching the dial. It's not tiredness, although tiredness often shows up alongside it. It's something that comes before tiredness, more silent. It's a specific kind of emptying that people who have already gone through a real change in reality recognize when you describe it, because they felt exactly this before everything changed. And at the time, they didn't know what it was. They interpreted it as a problem, as a sign they were going backwards, as evidence that something had gone wrong in the process. Only later, looking back, were they able to see the pattern. The emptiness comes first, always first. It's not a coincidence that it arrives at this moment and not another. It's not random that you're feeling this right now. There is a very precise logic behind what's happening, a logic that isn't obvious when you're inside it. But that becomes completely clear when you understand how a real change in reality actually works. And it starts with something most people never consider. Before anything new can truly enter your life, not superficially, not as an isolated event, but in a real and lasting way, what was there before needs to leave. Not gradually, not little by little, not in a way you barely notice, all at once, in a way you feel. The emptiness is that leaving. Think of a room that is full of old furniture, not necessarily bad furniture. Some pieces were good. Some served you well for a long time, some have history, have memory, have an emotional weight that makes the idea of removing them even harder. But they were bought for a version of you that existed before, for a size of life that you had before, for a way of inhabiting space that is no longer yours. You want to renovate this room, not a superficial renovation, not a rearrangement of the same furniture in different positions. A real renovation. You want it to be completely different, with a new energy, a new function, a quality of space that the old furniture could never allow, because it was made for a room that you no longer are. But to bring in the new furniture, you first need to remove the old. And that seems obvious when you read it. Of course you do. There's no way to put in the new without taking out the old. But what nobody tells you is what it's like to be in the room during this process. What it's like to be there after the old furniture has left and before the new has arrived. The room is empty, and it's not a neutral emptiness. It's an emptiness that speaks, that echoes, that shows the marks on the walls where the pictures used to hang, the grooves in the floor where the heavy furniture sat for years, the ghost outlines of things that existed and no longer do. The room seems wrong, seems incomplete, seems like something is missing because something truly is missing. You look at the space and the first reaction isn't to see the possibility, it's to feel the absence. And if someone walked into that room without knowing it was being renovated, they would think something had gone wrong. They would think there had been a loss, an involuntary emptying, something that needed to be urgently repaired. They wouldn't see the preparation. They would see the problem. That's exactly how most people experience their inner emptiness. Without the context of the project, without knowing the room was emptied on purpose, without understanding that the marks on the walls, the ghost outlines of things that are gone, aren't evidence of destruction but of transition. And without that context, the only available interpretation is that something is wrong, that you lost something you shouldn't have lost, that you urgently need to put back what left. But this interval between the leaving of the old and the arrival of the new is the most sacred moment of the entire renovation. Not the most comfortable, the most sacred, because it's the only moment when the space is completely open, when no old structure exists to limit what can be built, when possibility is total because it hasn't yet been filled by anything. The architect knows this is the most important moment of the entire process. It's when the project can still be anything. It's when the decisions that will define what the space becomes can be made with the greatest possible freedom. The emptiness you're feeling right now is that room in the interval. It's not the permanent absence of something. It's a space being prepared to receive what's coming. And what's being removed isn't physical objects you can watch leaving through the door. It's things much deeper and much harder to name. Things that carried so much weight for so long that you forgot they were structures and started thinking they were you. They are thought patterns you carried for so long, they became part of how you saw yourself. I'm not talking about obvious negative thoughts you knew you needed to change. I'm talking about something more subtle. The invisible assumptions that operated underneath everything. The assumption that certain things aren't for you. That there's a ceiling beyond which you don't pass. That the people around you have something you don't have, and that's why they go further. That the way things have always been for you is the way things will always be. These patterns didn't take up visible space. They weren't thoughts you had consciously every day. They were more like the structure of the walls of the room. You don't think about the walls. You just live within the limits they create without realizing it's them that are creating the limits. When the field starts preparing you for a real change in reality, those walls need to come down. And when walls come down, even walls that were limiting you, the first thing you feel isn't freedom. It's instability. It's the sensation that what was holding you up has gone and what comes next hasn't arrived yet. They are also beliefs about what you deserve that were built up in layers throughout your entire history. Every time you asked for something and didn't receive it, a layer was added. Every time you tried and didn't succeed, another. Every time someone said it wasn't possible, it wasn't for you, you were dreaming too big. Another layer. And those layers didn't stay in the mind. They settled in the body, in the way you enter a room, in the way you ask for things, in the way you pull back the moment something starts to truly arrive. These beliefs were taking up an enormous space inside you, a space that should have been available for the new reality, but that was being used to sustain a structure that prevented you from receiving it. And the field, which has an intelligence that can't be explained but can be felt when you stop fighting it, is doing the cleaning now. It's removing those layers. It's bringing down those walls. It's creating the space that needs to exist so that what's coming can arrive without finding the room still full of what was left from the previous chapter. They are also versions of yourself that have already fulfilled the role they were meant to fulfill. This is the hardest to let go of because those versions weren't bad. The version of you that survived with certain defense mechanisms needed them at the time. The version that kept certain distances to protect itself had real reasons for doing that. The version that settled for less because more seemed inaccessible was doing what it could with what it had. Those versions brought you here. They deserve gratitude, but they can't take you where you're going. They were built for a size of reality you're leaving behind. And when you try to bring those old versions into a new level of existence, it's like trying to walk through a small door carrying something too large to fit through it. You don't get through, not because the destination is wrong, but because what you're carrying doesn't fit. The emptiness is the process of releasing what doesn't fit. And there are also stories you told about your life that no longer belong to the chapter that's coming. Everyone has a narrative about themselves. A story of who you are, of how things work for you, of what your pattern is, your destiny, your place in the world. That narrative was built from the evidence you had available up until now. And it makes perfect sense when you look back at the past. The problem is that you're not going to the past. The reality that's coming doesn't fit into the narrative you built from what was left behind. It calls for a different story, a story that hasn't been written yet, because the events that will compose it haven't happened yet. And when the old narrative starts to leave, when the stories that defined you start losing the consistency they had, what you feel is the emptiness where they were. It's not an absence of identity. It's the old identity leaving so the new one can be written from the reality that's coming, instead of being built on top of what was left behind. And when all of this starts leaving at the same time, when the field does this deep and simultaneous cleaning that needs to happen before the real change, what you feel is exactly this: an emptying with no obvious cause, a neutrality that isn't peace, an absence of meaning that isn't because life lost meaning, but because the old meaning has gone and the new one hasn't yet arrived to fill the space it left. You are in the interval, and the interval is uncomfortable not because it's dangerous, but because it's unknown. Because the mind that was trained to always have a narrative, always have a direction, always have a clear sense of who you are and where you're going, suddenly finds itself without that support. And without support, it enters search mode. It starts asking what's wrong. It starts trying to create meaning where there isn't yet meaning to be created. It starts offering the old stories back as a solution to the discomfort of the emptiness, because at least those stories were known, at least those walls were familiar, at least that furniture was yours. But what it's interpreting as an absence of meaning is actually the absence of the old meaning, which is completely different. The old meaning left because it no longer belongs to who you're becoming. The new meaning is being built in real time, layer by layer, from the new frequency that's being installed. It's just not yet ready to be felt. It's still at the level of the field, hasn't yet descended to the level of conscious experience, doesn't yet have enough form to be named. But it's there, being built, with a precision and an intention that you can't see from where you are right now, but that you'll recognize completely when the room is ready and you look at what was built in the space the emptiness prepared. There's a sequence to how reality changes that almost no one knows, because no one teaches it. Oh, most people imagine that a change in reality works like this. You do the internal work, you align yourself, you affirm, you visualize, you raise your frequency, and then things start to change around you. One thing leads to another. The internal reflects in the external, and the new reality builds progressively and perceptibly. And in part, that's how it works. But there's a step before that which no one mentions. Before the new reality starts showing up on the outside, before any external evidence confirms that something is changing, there's a period when everything seems to stop, when the movement that existed disappears, when that feeling that things were flowing, that you were progressing, that the process was happening, simply goes away, and you find yourself with nothing to show for it. No sign that you're on the right track. No confirmation that what you've done up until now served any purpose. Just the emptiness. This isn't the process failing. It's the process reaching its most important stage. Think about how a seed works. It's planted in the dark, under the earth, without light, without visible movement, without any external sign that anything is happening. And it's exactly there, in the dark and in the silence, that the most important thing happens. The seed dissolves. It loses the form it had. And from that dissolution, from that emptying of the old structure, something completely new begins to emerge. If you could see the seed during this process, it would look like destruction. It would look like it's coming apart, like something went wrong, like the plant will never come. But what's happening is the most fundamental transformation possible. The old structure needs to dissolve completely so the new one can emerge. You are that seed right now. The emptiness isn't the end of the process, it's the deepest point of it. It's where the dissolution of the old is most complete, and where the emergence of the new is closest. And the reality that's coming, the one you can't see yet, the one that doesn't have perceptible form yet, it can't arrive while the old is still occupying the space. The emptiness is the prerequisite, not the consequence. The change in reality doesn't happen, and then you feel the emptiness. You feel the emptiness, and then reality changes. That's the real sequence. And when you understand this, when you stop interpreting the emptiness as a sign that something went wrong, and start recognizing it as a sign that something is about to appear, everything changes about the way you inhabit this space. Now comes the hardest part. What you do when you're inside the emptiness. Because knowing it has a function doesn't eliminate the discomfort of being inside it. Knowing it's part of the process doesn't make the neutrality go away. And the natural tendency, the thing the mind insists on most urgently when it's in the emptiness, was to fill it, to put something in there so it stops feeling empty. And that's exactly what interrupts the process. When you fill the emptiness before it's time, when you rush to create a new narrative, a new project, a new direction, a new meaning before the old has finished leaving, and the new has arrived with the necessary strength, you essentially put furniture back in the room that was being prepared. Not the new furniture, the old, with a slight update perhaps, a new color perhaps, but the same structure, the same pattern, the same frequency that was being removed. And the process has to start over. The first thing you need to do inside the emptiness is resist the impulse to fill it urgently. I'm not saying to be paralyzed, I'm not saying to stop living or functioning. I'm saying there's an enormous difference between continuing your life normally while the process happens and entering emergency mode, trying to create artificial meaning for a space that's being prepared to receive real meaning. Continuing your life normally is possible and necessary. Acting from the urgency of filling the emptiness is what interrupts everything. The second thing is to learn to stay quiet inside the discomfort without turning it into a catastrophe. The emptiness is uncomfortable. That's the truth. There's no way to be inside it without feeling the strangeness, the absence, the neutrality that isn't peace. But there's a difference between feeling the discomfort and suffering the discomfort. Feeling is inevitable. Suffering is optional, and it happens when you add on top of the discomfort the story that this means something is very wrong, that you're going backwards, that you'll never get out of here. When you can stay with the discomfort without adding the catastrophe story on top, it changes in quality. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes more livable. Like the difference between being in a dark room and being in a dark room while being afraid of the dark. The darkness is the same. The experience is completely different. The third thing is to trust the intelligence of the process, even without being able to see it. This is the hardest because it asks for something the rational mind finds almost impossible. Trusting what can't be proven. The field that's working in you right now doesn't offer visible evidence that it's functioning. There's no way to confirm externally that the process is going in the right direction. You need to trust based on something more subtle than evidence. Based on the recognition that you got here following this process. That every time you crossed an emptiness before something emerged on the other side, That the intelligence operating underneath everything you're living didn't bring you this far to abandon you in the interval. Trusting doesn't mean pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It means allowing the process to continue even without being able to control it. And there's a fourth thing, simpler and more powerful than it seems. Pay attention to the small signals that appear inside the emptiness. Not the big revelations, not the dramatic insights, the small ones. An interest that arises gently, a feeling that something specific is worth exploring. A quiet impulse in a direction that has no obvious logic, but that resonates in a different way from everything else. These small signals are the first movements of the new reality beginning to take shape. They appear small because they're still fragile, still in their early stages, and if you give them attention, if you follow what resonates, even without understanding yet where it leads, you start to co-create the reality that's coming instead of simply waiting for it to appear. And there's a point inside the emptiness when something starts to change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in a way you can feel if you're paying attention. The first sign is a gentle return of curiosity. During the emptiness, curiosity disappears. Things that used to spark interest become neutral. And then, in a moment you weren't expecting, something catches your attention in a different way. A question that seems worth exploring. A topic that pulls you back after a period of nothing, pulling you toward anything. It's small, it's subtle, but it's real. And it's the first sign that the space that was empty is beginning to receive. The second sign is a quiet clarity about what no longer serves you. Not an angry clarity, not a dramatic rejection, not a declaration that you're changing everything. A calm certainty, almost without words, that a certain path, a certain relationship with something or someone, a certain way of positioning yourself in the world has reached its natural end. This clarity doesn't ask for discussion. It doesn't need to be justified. It simply exists, like a fact you know without having needed to think about it. The third sign is a feeling of lightness that appears in specific moments. Not a constant lightness, not euphoria. Specific moments when the weight that was present decreases slightly, when you breathe a little more easily, when the world seems a little less dense than it was. These moments are brief at first, but they become more frequent. And each one is the new field beginning to settle in. The fourth sign, and perhaps the most concrete of all, is that situations and people start appearing that weren't part of the previous scene. Not forced, not as the result of a search. Naturally, almost accidentally, something that belongs to the new frequency begins to enter the field. A conversation that wasn't expected. An opportunity that arises from a place you weren't monitoring. A synchronicity that breaks the neutrality of the emptiness with a precision that can't be coincidence. When these signals start to appear, even if small, even if isolated, even if you don't yet know exactly what they mean, it's the field telling you that the interval is coming to an end, that the room has been emptied and is ready, that the new furniture is on its way, and what you do in that moment matters as much as what you did inside the emptiness. Don't accelerate. Don't start building urgently because the first signs appeared. The new reality is emerging at a speed that is the right speed for it to consolidate in a real way. If you start forcing before the time is right, if you take the first signs and try to build an entire structure on top of them before they have enough root, you create an instability that can cause the process to recede. Follow the signals slowly, with attention, with the same care you would use to tend to something that is just beginning, that is still fragile, that needs specific conditions to grow strong. The new reality doesn't need to be forced, it needs to be received. You made it here, and the emptiness you were feeling before you started watching this video probably has a name now. Not a technical name, a meaning, an understanding that what was frightening you isn't what it seemed to be. That the absence you were living isn't an absence of arrival, but a presence of preparation. That the space that seemed empty was being emptied with a precision and an intention you couldn't see because you were inside it, without access to the complete project. You're not lost, you're in the interval, and the interval is the place closest to what's coming that exists. Not because it's comfortable, because it's necessary. Because without it, the new reality has nowhere to land. Without the emptying, the new finds no space. Without the clean room, the new furniture doesn't arrive. The emptiness you lived made sense. The time it lasted made sense. The intensity of the absence is directly proportional to the magnitude of what is being prepared to fill that space. And now you have a choice you didn't have before you understood this. You can keep trying to fill the emptiness with urgency, trying to create meaning before it's time, trying to force a direction before the right direction is ready to appear. Or you can trust the process that's happening on the inside. You can breathe inside the empty space knowing it's being prepared. You can follow the small signals when they appear, without trying to build an entire structure on top of each one before it has root. You can inhabit the interval with awareness instead of inhabiting it with fear. And that difference between inhabiting the interval with awareness or with fear is what determines whether the new reality that's coming manages to install itself in a complete and lasting way, or whether the process needs to start one more time. Leave a comment with what you're feeling right now. It doesn't need to be elaborate. It can be one word, it can be a short sentence. What stayed with you when you finished watching? What moved inside you while you were listening? Because naming what you're living is the first act of crossing with awareness, instead of crossing in the dark. And since you made it here, since something in this content touched what you're living in a way that few things do, there's a simple way to make sure the next videos reach you at the moment you need them most. Subscribe to the channel. Not because it's what everyone asks for at the end of a video, but because what's being built here, this conversation that doesn't explain from the outside, but recognizes from the inside, continues. Each new video will arrive at a moment when you'll need exactly what it has to say. Not by coincidence, because you chose to be here. And choosing to be here is the first act of someone who is taking the process seriously. Hit the subscribe button, turn on the bell, and let the field work. And if you want to understand what happens when the emptiness ends and the new reality starts to consolidate, when the signals get stronger and you need to know how to sustain what's coming without letting the old pattern pull you back, the next video will show you exactly that. Because leaving the emptiness is one thing. Building inside what comes after is something completely different.